"You're not half the woman your sister is," my mom said at dinner. I pushed my chair back and said, "Then she can start paying your rent." Dad turned pale. "Rent? What rent?" The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel my heart racing, the weight of the years I had kept quiet crashing over me. The words had slipped out before I could stop them, and now they hung in the air, impossible to ignore. I didn't look at my parents right away. I couldn't. Instead, I focused on the cold, sterile light that hung above the table, casting harsh shadows on the food in front of me. It looked just like every other Friday dinner. The same roast chicken, the same slightly too salty potatoes, the same sterile politeness that had defined every meal for as long as I could remember. Only now, the air was different. Thick with a tension I couldn't push away, no matter how hard I tried. I had spent my whole life trying to stay out of the way, trying to be the quiet one, the one who made things easier for everyone else. But tonight, something in me snapped. I had kept quiet for too long. I had swallowed every compliment they gave Vivien, every praise for her achievements, that felt like it was meant for both of us. But I always had to pretend it didn't sting. I had silently paid their mortgage for years. A burden I'd taken on, because I felt like I had no choice. My parents had never asked, not outright. But their looks, the little hints, the way they dropped it into conversations when they needed help. I couldn't ignore it. And Vivien, she never even noticed. She never had to. I glanced up at my dad, and his face was ashen. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "What rent?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. I could feel the guilt twisting in my stomach. But it was different now. This was no longer about me feeling sorry for them. This was about me taking back something I had let slip away for far too long. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. But it was like I was no longer in control. "The mortgage payments for the last 3 years," I said quietly, my voice steady. 3 years of payments, every single month. I've been the one paying it, not Vivien. Me. There it was. The truth laid bare, and I wasn't even sure if I felt relief or guilt. My father's eyes darted from me to my mom, then back again, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Mom's face twisted into something close to disgust, but it wasn't at me. It was at the audacity of what I had just said. "That's not true," my mother said, her voice sharp. "We never asked you to. You didn't have to." I cut in. "I just did it. Every month, without a word. Because that's what family does, right? You take care of each other, even when no one asks." The words were out before I could stop them, and I couldn't take them back. My mom's face turned red, her eyes narrowing. But the most striking thing was how my dad's face drained of color. He looked almost scared. It was like he had never seen me before. The room was so still that I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator in the next room. My mother reached for her glass of water, her hand shaking ever so slightly. She cleared her throat, her voice steadying as she tried to regain control of the situation. "Nora, don't be dramatic," she said, her words clipped. "We never asked you to do that." She stopped herself, her gaze flickering between me and Vivien, who had been sitting there silently. Now Vivien's smile faltered, and for the first time in all these years, I saw something that resembled guilt flash in her eyes. But it was quickly masked by a shrug. "It's really not a big deal, Nora," she said, her voice too casual. "I just helped out with a few things, that's all." I couldn't stop myself from laughing, the sound bitter in my throat. "Helped out?" I repeated, my voice rising. "No, you didn't help. You took the credit. You let me do it all while you were out getting awards and applause, and I never said a word. But this is the moment it all falls apart, Vivien. You're not the hero here." There was a stunned silence as the weight of my words settled. I felt my chest tighten, But this time I didn't shrink back. I held my ground. The table was still, the air heavy with unspoken truths. For a moment, I thought I might crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I rose from my seat slowly, the scrape of the chair legs on the floor, breaking the silence like the first crack of thunder before a storm. I didn't know what I was doing, but I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "You can rewrite your little stories all you want, but I won't be part of it anymore." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of years of silence lifting with every step. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of freedom. I stood in the hallway, my hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything I had just said. I didn't know what to expect when I walked out of that room, but part of me had hoped that it would feel like a release, like I'd finally let go of all the years of silently bearing the burden. But it didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of something, with no idea what was on the other side. The house was still, except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could hear my mom's voice, faintly, as she tried to regain control of the situation. I wanted to walk away, to leave it all behind. But something in me kept me rooted to that spot, as though I couldn't fully escape until I knew what they'd say next. For a long time, I had been invisible. Or at least, that's how it felt. Growing up, Vivien had always been the one who took the spotlight. The perfect daughter. The one who excelled at everything, from academics to sports to the very air she breathed. She was the golden child, the one who never had to try too hard. I didn't resent her for it, not exactly. But it hurt, in ways I couldn't explain, that she was the one everyone admired, the one my parents praised constantly. And all I wanted was to matter, to be seen. But tonight I'd been seen. The words were out there, hanging in the air. I had been the one keeping the family afloat, not Vivien. And in that moment, I realized how much I had let that truth go unnoticed. I didn't know if I could ever go back to pretending. I made my way to the front door, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. The cool air hit me as soon as I stepped outside, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I breathed in deeply, trying to calm the storm inside me. It was strange, the way the world seemed to stop moving for a moment. It wasn't just the truth I had revealed that was sinking in. It was the silence that followed. No one had said a word, at least not loud enough for me to hear. I had broken something open, but the cracks hadn't started to heal yet. The silence felt like a weight, heavier than anything I'd ever carried before. And yet, somehow, it wasn't the silence that scared me. It was the knowing. Knowing that the truth was out, and I couldn't take it back. I kept walking, feeling the weight in my chest lighten with every step. The air felt different, cleaner, like it wasn't filled with years of quiet sacrifices anymore. I didn't know if it would be better or worse, but I knew it would never be the same. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I hadn't planned to say what I did. It had just spilled out, like a dam breaking. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning or proving anything. It was just about being seen. And for a fleeting moment, I felt like I had been, in that split second when everything stopped. I went to my car, not sure where I was driving, only knowing that I needed to keep moving. The cold air was bracing, and it felt good. It felt real. I turned the key in the ignition and drove, not thinking about the dinner I just walked out on, or the family that had always expected me to fade into the background. I just drove. When I got home, I didn't feel like going inside. The apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. But it was mine. I had worked for it, every little thing in that space. From the way the light hit the windows to the comfortable silence. I found in the stillness of my own home, was something I had built for myself. I stood by the window for a while, looking out over the city. The lights blinked softly, like the world outside was asleep, just as I felt inside. But it wasn't a bad kind of tired. It was a release. The kind that comes when you let go of something that's been holding you down for too long. I thought about calling Sarah. I wanted to talk to someone. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out what I was feeling. So I didn't. I just sat there, watching the world move on while I stayed still. It felt like the beginning of something. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like it had to happen. It wasn't the end of anything, but it was the beginning of something new. Something for me. I didn't know if my family would ever understand. I didn't know if they would ever truly see me for who I was, and not just for the role they had cast me in. But in that moment, I realized that it didn't matter. I wasn't going to spend another year pretending to be invisible. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story anymore. I reached for my phone, staring at it for a long moment. I knew what I had to do next, and it wasn't about them. It was about me. The days after that dinner passed in a blur, the weight of everything still hanging over me, like a storm waiting to break. I didn't know what I was waiting for, or what I expected to happen, but the silence was almost unbearable. I went to work, did what I had to do, and came home, trying to distract myself with whatever I could: books, music, anything that could fill the space with sound, so that I wouldn't have to face the silence in my own head. I kept thinking about how it all started. How everything I had done for my family had never been enough. How for years I had carried the weight of their expectations, never once asking for help, never once speaking up. The truth I had hidden from them wasn't just about money, it was about everything. It was about all the sacrifices I had made, the things I had quietly given up, because it seemed like that was what I was supposed to do. And now, after everything, I wondered if any of it had ever mattered, if any of it had ever been seen. At work, I sat in my cubicle, the sound of my keyboard clicking the only noise around me. The office was quiet, the hum of the forklifts at the docks outside barely audible over the soft drone of the air conditioning. I had been handling the company's finances for years, carefully balancing numbers, making sure everything was in line. There was comfort in it, in the predictability of spreadsheets and deadlines. There was no room for emotions, no room for anything messy. Just numbers, neat and ordered, just like the life I had tried to keep. But outside the office, things weren't so tidy. There was always a mess, and I had never let anyone see it. When I first started paying the mortgage, it was just one more thing to add to my list. One more thing to make sure was taken care of, so that my family wouldn't have to worry. It was never supposed to be this big thing. It was just something I did, quietly, without fanfare, because that's how I had been taught to handle things. Don't make a fuss. Don't ask for help. Just do what needs to be done. But over time, it became more than just the mortgage. It became everything I had kept buried, every little sacrifice I made without ever saying a word about it. I never let myself question why I was doing it. I never allowed myself to think about the years I had spent paying for something that wasn't even mine. But now, with the truth hanging in the air, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just the money that hurt, it was everything that had been built on top of it. The way my parents had built their entire narrative around Vivien, always praising her, always elevating her above me, while I quietly paid for their house, their bills, their life. I had spent years living in the background, quietly waiting for my turn, but it never came. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own goals, just so I could be the silent support behind the scenes. And when I finally tried to step forward, to claim the recognition I deserved, they hadn't even noticed. It wasn't that I needed the praise. It wasn't that I wanted to be seen as the hero. It was that I had been invisible for so long, and I was finally tired of being the one who always took the back seat. I was tired of being the second daughter, the one who wasn't enough. I didn't know where to go from here. I didn't know if they would ever truly understand what I had done, or if they even cared. But the weight of it was starting to lift. For the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like I was doing something for myself. I wasn't just holding everything together for everyone else. I was starting to let go of the things that had kept me in the background for so long. That night, after work, I sat down at my kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet hum of my apartment. The city lights outside shone dimly through the window, but inside, everything was still. I pulled out the folder that held the mortgage paperwork. The stack was thick, the numbers tight and clean on the pages. Every month, I had quietly transferred money into their account, without question, without complaint. But as I flipped through the pages, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had done this. It wasn't Vivien. It wasn't my parents. It was me. I had paid the price for their comfort, for their lies. I had kept their story going, while mine was hidden in the shadows. The silence in the apartment felt different now. It wasn't heavy with guilt or regret. It was just empty, and that was okay. I had spent so many years filling the silence with everything I thought I should be, with everything I thought they wanted me to be. But now I realized it was time to fill the silence with what I needed. I stood up from the table, the paperwork still in my hands, and walked to the window. The city below was alive, people moving, lights flashing, the hum of life continuing on. But here, in this moment, I felt like I was standing still. Like I was the only one who had finally stopped pretending. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I wasn't sure if my family would ever understand, or if they would ever truly see me for who I was. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide anymore. I didn't need them to acknowledge what I had done. I didn't need them to praise me for it. What I needed was to stop pretending, to stop erasing myself to make room for their story. The truth had been out there for so long, and now it was time for me to start living it. When I walked out of that dinner, I didn't know if I would ever look back. The air felt different, like everything I had kept bottled up inside for years was finally spilling out. The silence in the house was suffocating, and I couldn't stand it for another second. I needed to be away from them, away from the expectations, away from the constant pressure to shrink and stay small. I walked down the street, not really knowing where I was going, just needing space to breathe. The city around me was moving, but I felt frozen in time. The cold air cut through my jacket, but it was a relief. It was something real, something I could feel. I wasn't sure how to process what had just happened. I wasn't even sure if I was ready to deal with the fallout. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going back to the way things were. The drive to my apartment was long and quiet, and by the time I reached the building, I had no idea what to expect. My head was full of 1,000 questions, 1,000 thoughts, but none of them had answers. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had finally stood up for myself. For the first time, I had said what I needed to say, and I didn't back down. I entered my apartment and felt the weight of the door close behind me, shutting out the world for just a moment. The stillness inside felt strangely comforting, like I had stepped into a place where I could finally take a deep breath and let my guard down. But it didn't last long. The weight of what had just happened still hung over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Saying the words, walking out, they weren't enough to undo the years of silence. They weren't enough to change what had happened. But they were a start. I sat on the couch, staring out at the city skyline through the large windows. The lights from the buildings twinkled in the distance. But it all felt so far away. I had spent so much time trying to keep the peace, trying to keep everyone happy, that I had forgotten what it meant to make myself happy. To stand up for what I needed. I thought about my parents, about the dinner table, about the years I had quietly carried the weight of their expectations. I had been the one who picked up the pieces when things fell apart, the one who paid the bills without ever asking for anything in return. I had done it out of love, out of a sense of duty, but mostly out of the belief that it was what I was supposed to do. That's what family does, right? But when I really thought about it, I realized that I had been the only one holding everything together. And yet, I was never given credit for it. The more I thought about it, the more the anger built up inside me. How could they not see? How could they not notice all the things I had done? All the sacrifices I had made? My mother's words still echoed in my mind. "You're not half the woman your sister is." I knew she didn't mean it in the way it sounded, but it still stung. It felt like another reminder that I would never measure up, that I would never be good enough. But the thing was, I wasn't doing it for her approval. I wasn't doing it for Vivien. I wasn't even doing it for my father. I had spent so long doing everything for everyone else that I had forgotten about myself. That had to change. It was time for me to stop living in their shadows, to stop being the one who always played second fiddle to Vivien's spotlight. I was done with that. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my messages, but stopped when I saw one from Sarah. "Nora," it read, "I think you should know. Your parents are planning a family appreciation dinner next month in Seattle. They asked me to make the slideshow." I stared at the message for a few seconds before typing back. "Let me guess, it's about Vivien." Sarah's response was quick. "It's worse than that. They want to highlight her as the reason the house was saved. They gave me captions. They're calling her the anchor of the family." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before I typed, "Send me the file." It didn't take long for the slideshow to arrive. I opened the file and my heart sank. There were photos of Vivien standing proudly in front of the house, her face beaming with pride. The captions were even worse. "Thank you, Vivien, for keeping our family home safe." They were painting a picture of her as the hero, as the one who had saved everything. But I knew the truth. I was the one who had paid for the house. I was the one who had kept it standing, month after month, without anyone even acknowledging it. And now they were rewriting the story, making Vivien the hero when I had done all the work. It wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. A small laugh escaped me, bitter and hollow. The truth had been so carefully hidden, and now they were trying to twist it even further. But I wouldn't let them. I created a copy of the file and added what they had erased. After their final slide, I inserted a timeline of the mortgage payments, a bar chart of monthly support, and screenshots of messages from my mother, carefully blurred for privacy. The last slide was simple, a photo of the house, with the words, "The truth deserves a place, too." I saved the file, backing it up on my laptop and uploading it to the cloud. I kept the USB drive with me, tucked safely in my bag. I wasn't sure when or how I would use it. But I knew one thing for sure. It was time to make sure the truth couldn't be buried anymore. The quiet in my apartment felt different now, like it had shifted. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of the weight I had carried for so long. For the first time, I wasn't hiding anymore. And I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. The days that followed felt like a strange blur. My mind was spinning, torn between the relief of finally speaking the truth and the weight of what would come next. I hadn't expected it to feel so unsettling. I thought that walking away from my family, confronting them with the reality of everything I had done, would give me the freedom I was craving. But instead, it felt like a huge, uncharted territory, like stepping into a world where nothing was familiar anymore. I tried to focus on my work, but even there, my mind kept drifting. Every time I sat at my desk, the quiet hum of the office did little to drown out the thoughts racing through my head. What had I done? Had I gone too far? I had been holding on to this anger, this frustration, for so long. But now that it was out in the open, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. It was no longer about keeping the peace or maintaining the illusion. The truth had been laid bare, and I didn't know if I could go back to pretending like everything was okay. At night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering softly in the distance, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't get the image of my parents' faces out of my head, the shock in my father's eyes, the disbelief on my mother's face. I couldn't tell if they were truly surprised or if they had just never seen me as more than the quiet one. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I had said my piece, and I couldn't take it back. But the silence that followed that night hung over me like a dark cloud. It was different this time. No phone calls from my mother checking in, no small talk from my dad asking about work. Just silence. It made me second-guess myself. Had I made a mistake by speaking up? Had I shattered something that could never be fixed? I tried not to dwell on it, but it was hard. I had been living in the shadows for so long, always the one who quietly supported everyone else, that I didn't know how to handle the space I had created for myself. For the first time, I was standing on my own, and it felt both terrifying and liberating. But I had no idea where to go from here. That was when I got the message from Sarah. Her name popped up on my phone, and I couldn't help but feel a little relieved. It had been a while since I had heard from her, and I needed someone to talk to. "Nora," she wrote, "I think you should know. Your parents are planning a family appreciation dinner next month in Seattle. They asked me to make the slideshow." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. My stomach turned. I had a bad feeling about this. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about what they were planning to say, how they were going to rewrite the story once again. "Let me guess," I typed. "It's about Vivien." The response came quickly. "It's worse than that. They want to highlight her as the reason the house was saved." They gave me captions. "They're calling her the anchor of the family." A cold, familiar anger flared inside me. I had known this was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. They had never acknowledged what I had done. They had never seen the sacrifices I had made. And now they were rewriting the entire narrative, turning Vivien into the hero, when I had been the one carrying the weight all along. I sat there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. I could feel the heat of frustration building in my chest, the same old feeling of being overlooked, of being erased. But this time, it wasn't going to happen again. "Send me the file." I typed, my fingers trembling slightly. It didn't take long for the slideshow to arrive. I opened the file and stared at the images. The photos of Vivien standing proudly in front of the house, her face full of the kind of smug confidence that made my stomach turn. And the captions. "Thank you, Vivien, for keeping our family home safe." The words burned on the screen, each one another reminder of how they had rewritten the story to fit their narrative. I felt a surge of anger flood through me. This wasn't just about the mortgage anymore. This was about everything. The years I had quietly supported them, the sacrifices I had made, and how none of it had ever mattered to them. How they had used me without even acknowledging it. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I opened a new file and began to add my own version of the story. I inserted the timeline of the mortgage payments, the bar charts showing exactly how much I had contributed, the screenshots of messages from my mother. Each slide was a quiet testament to everything I had done, and everything they had tried to erase. The last slide was simple, a photo of the house with the words, "The truth deserves a place too." I saved the file and backed it up, uploading it to the cloud. I didn't know when I would need it, but I knew I had to be prepared. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be buried anymore. For years I had been invisible, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story anymore. The silence in my apartment was different now. It wasn't the same heavy silence I had felt before. It was lighter, more freeing. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I had stepped into the light, and I wasn't going back. I didn't know what I was expecting when I made the decision to expose the truth. Maybe I thought it would feel like a weight lifting off my shoulders, a moment of clarity. But all I felt was this uneasy stillness inside, like I had cracked open something that would never close again. The truth was out there, but the aftermath was still lingering, unresolved. I had a few days to sit with it, and those days weren't easy. I couldn't get the images of my parents' shocked faces out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's ashen face, my mother's stiff posture, the way Vivien had tried to brush it all off with a weak smile. It felt like a breach had opened in the foundation of everything I had known. And I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to patch it up. The silence from my family was deafening, no calls, no messages. It was like they were waiting for me to reach out first, to apologize for what I had said, to take it all back. But I wasn't going to do that. I had drawn my line, and I wasn't going to cross it again. Still, the quiet was unsettling. The kind of quiet that makes you second guess everything you've done. It wasn't just about the dinner anymore. It was about everything. The years I had spent quietly supporting them. The moments I had swallowed my feelings, just to keep the peace. All of that was coming to a head, and I didn't know if I was ready for what was next. But I wasn't going to hide anymore. One afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, I got a message from Sarah. It was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "Nora, I think you should know. Your parents are planning a family appreciation dinner next month in Seattle. They asked me to make the slideshow." My stomach twisted. I didn't want to know this. I didn't want to deal with the aftermath of their attempts to rewrite the story, once again. To put Vivien on a pedestal when it had been me holding everything together. The part of me that wanted to ignore it, to leave it all behind, was fighting against the part of me that knew I couldn't let this go. I typed a response quickly, my fingers stiff against the keys. "Let me guess. It's about Vivien." Sarah's reply came in seconds, but it wasn't the reassurance I needed. It was worse. It's worse than that. They want to highlight her as the reason the house was saved. They gave me captions. They're calling her the anchor of the family. That was it. The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't enough that they hadn't seen what I had done. They were actively erasing me. Rewriting the narrative in a way that suited them. A narrative where Vivien could wear the crown of the family hero, while I quietly picked up the pieces behind the scenes. I sat there for a moment, letting the anger burn through me, sharper than it had been before. The fire that had been smoldering inside me ever since the dinner was finally breaking through. I had taken their silence, their dismissal, for too long. I had let them treat me like a shadow, just another piece of furniture in the background of their perfect little story. But this time, I wasn't going to let them. Not again. "Send me the file." I typed, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. It didn't take long before Sarah sent the slideshow. I clicked open the file, and felt my chest tighten as I looked at the pictures. Vivien, standing proudly in front of the house, her smile wide, her posture perfect. And the captions, "Thank you, Vivien, for keeping our family home safe." The words burned in my mind, and I could feel my heart rate quicken. They had erased me from the story entirely, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I opened a new file on my laptop, and as the words began to form on the screen, a sense of calm washed over me. This was what I needed to do. I wasn't going to let them take credit for something they hadn't done. I spent hours working on it, piecing together the timeline of mortgage payments, the records of transfers, the dates, the amounts. Everything I had quietly done, without asking for anything in return. I included screenshots of the messages from my mother. The little ways she had always made me feel like my sacrifices were just part of the deal. I wasn't going to hide it anymore. The last slide was simple. A photo of the house, with the words, "The truth deserves a place, too." I saved the file, backed it up on my laptop, and uploaded it to the cloud. The last step was to keep the USB drive in my bag, a quiet reminder that I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story this time. They would see the truth, whether they wanted to or not. When I was finished, I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The file was complete, and for the first time, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The family's story wasn't theirs to tell. It was mine. But still, the silence from my family remained. They hadn't reached out since that night. It was like they were waiting for me to back down, for me to apologize. But I knew now. I wasn't going to shrink into the background again. I wasn't going to apologize for speaking my truth. I just didn't know when they would come for the truth I had given them. But when they did, I'd be ready. The days after I sent the file were long and quiet, filled with an unsettling calmness that kept me on edge. My phone stayed silent, the usual texts from my parents or Vivien never coming. It was like they were waiting for me to call, to apologize, to back down. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. Still, the silence felt heavy. I tried to focus on work, on keeping my life moving forward, but the thought of what was coming next, the fallout from everything I had exposed, never left my mind. The truth was out there now, but how would they respond? Would they confront me? Would they try to erase me all over again? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I had no choice but to wait. Then 2 weeks later, I received an invitation. The message popped up on my phone, and for a moment, I thought it was spam. But then I saw the name Sarah. She had been silent for a while, and I didn't know if it was because of the truth I had exposed, or if she was just caught up in the whirlwind of everything. The message was simple. "Family appreciation dinner in Seattle. I hope you can come." My stomach twisted. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but the invitation felt inevitable. After everything I had done, after exposing the truth, it seemed like they were trying to reconcile, trying to pull me back into their story. Maybe they thought I would just let it all go. Maybe they thought that inviting me to this dinner would make everything right again. I didn't know what to think, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to go there to fix anything for them. I wasn't going to pretend. If I was going, it would be for me, not for them. A week later, I arrived in Seattle, standing outside the restaurant where the dinner was taking place. The building gleamed under the streetlights, the glass reflecting the city's glow. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had to force myself to walk inside. I wasn't sure what I expected, but this wasn't it. I wasn't walking in to apologize. I wasn't walking in to play the role they expected. I was walking in to be seen for the first time. The moment I entered, I saw them: my parents, Vivien, all of the extended family. They were gathered around a large table, talking, laughing, pretending everything was normal. It looked like something out of a magazine. Like a perfect family photo waiting to happen. And I was supposed to be part of that. I could already feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I stood near the door, watching them for a moment, trying to gather myself before stepping forward. Vivien, in her emerald dress, looked like she was glowing, like the spotlight was always on her, as usual. My parents were all smiles, their eyes filled with pride as they looked at her. I felt a flash of anger, but I pushed it down. I was done hiding. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my part in this story. As I made my way to the table, I could feel the eyes of the room on me. They all turned as I approached, the smiles faltering for just a second, before they quickly recovered. Vivien's expression shifted too. Her mouth turned into a thin line, as if she knew something was about to happen, but wasn't sure what. I could feel the tension building, as my father stood to greet me. His voice strained but polite. "Nora, so glad you could make it," he said, trying to sound warm, but the cracks in his tone were obvious. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched him, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a family dinner. This wasn't about reconnecting. This was about rewriting history, and I couldn't let them do it. "Thank you for the invitation," I said, my voice calm but firm. I wasn't here to make peace. I wasn't here to smile through the lies. I was here to make sure my voice was heard. I took a seat at the table, but as I did, the slideshow started, flicking to life on the screen behind me. The photos of Vivien standing in front of the house filled the screen, her arms raised in triumph. The captions rolling beneath. "Thank you, Vivien, for keeping our family home safe," they said, over and over. I could feel my pulse quicken, the rage rising again, but this time, I didn't back down. I stood up from the table, all eyes now fixed on me, and I walked over to the screen. I wasn't going to sit there and pretend. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let them erase me from the story any longer. With a deep breath, I clicked the remote and changed the slide. The screen flickered, and then there it was, a bar chart. It displayed the monthly payments I had made for the house, the amounts, the dates, the cold, hard facts. Then, another slide appeared, a timeline of the transfers, showing how I had kept the house standing for 3 years, paying without ever asking for anything in return. The room went silent. The smiles vanished. My father's face went white, and Vivien's grin disappeared as she looked at the screen, the truth now glaring back at her. I stood there, watching them, letting the silence settle. The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about making sure they could no longer deny what had always been true. "For 3 years," I said, my voice steady, "I paid the mortgage. Not Vivien, not anyone else. Me. And I'm done letting you rewrite the story." My father's hand went to his forehead, and Vivien, visibly shaken, opened her mouth to speak but quickly closed it. My mother's face was the hardest to read. It wasn't shame or guilt, it was fear. Fear of being exposed for what they had done. I didn't need to say anything else. The room was still, the truth hanging in the air, like a heavy cloud. I turned and walked out of the room, not because I was finished, but because I had made my point. The truth had been spoken, and I was no longer going to play their game. Outside, the cool Seattle air hit me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back to the way things were. 2 days after the dinner, I was watering a plant on my balcony when I heard the knock. It was quiet at first, just a soft tap on the door, but it echoed in the stillness of my apartment, a sound that pulled me away from the small, comforting task of taking care of something that was mine. I set the watering can down and walked to the door, my heart suddenly racing for reasons I couldn't fully understand. I looked through the peephole and saw them standing there. My parents. They were close together, a little too close. As if they were trying to hide something from the world. My mother's eyes were swollen, and my father's shoulders were tight. Like the weight of whatever had been said in the past. Few days had aged them both. For the first time, they seemed smaller, less imposing than they ever had before. The image didn't match the memories I had of them, strong, in control, always the ones who held everything together. I opened the door. And they stepped inside slowly, almost hesitantly, as if they weren't sure they were welcome anymore. They took in the space around them, the way the sunlight filtered through the large windows, the new furniture that was so much more me than anything I had ever had before. The room felt bright, clean, almost foreign to them. My mother spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "Nora, we're sorry," she said. "We were wrong. We shouldn't have let the story become something it wasn't." Her words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had spent so long waiting for this moment, for an apology, for acknowledgement, but hearing it from her, after everything, felt different. It wasn't the kind of apology I thought I wanted. It didn't undo the years of silence. It didn't change the truth. But it was something. It was a crack in the wall I had spent so long building around them. "We shouldn't have asked you to carry so much alone," my father added, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. He sounded so tired, so unlike the man who had once dismissed my sacrifices like they were nothing. I looked at them for a moment, not sure how to react. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. But the hurt still lingered, buried underneath the surface. I had spent so much of my life giving, bending, twisting myself into whatever shape they needed, and I was done. But that didn't mean I had forgiven everything. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need the apology," I said quietly. "What I needed was for you to see me, to see what I've done." My mother's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for me, her hands trembling. "We see you now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't pull away, but I didn't embrace her either. I let the moment hang in the air between us. There was so much that had been said in silence for years, and no simple apology could change that. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need them to change the past. I just needed them to understand that I was no longer the person they thought I was. My father spoke again, his voice full of uncertainty. "We want your name on the house. You've earned it," he said, the words coming out with an awkwardness I wasn't used to. It was like they were offering me a piece of the life they had built, something that had always felt just out of my reach. I shook my head slowly. "I don't need it," I said. "I have a home now, my own." It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about finally being seen for who I truly was. I had built my life from the ground up, without their help, without their approval. And that was enough. My father looked down at the floor, his hands clasped together in front of him. My mother's shoulders slumped, the fight drained from her. "We just wanted to make it right," she said, her voice breaking. "We wanted to fix things." I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. "The truth can't be fixed," I said softly. "But maybe we can start from here." They didn't say anything after that. They just stood there, looking at me, their faces full of a kind of quiet regret. It wasn't the perfect resolution I had always imagined, but it was the beginning of something new. A starting point. Maybe, for the first time, we were all standing on equal ground, not defined by old stories or old roles. When they left, I didn't feel the familiar weight of guilt or the need to explain myself. Instead, I felt something lighter, something freer. The apartment seemed brighter as they stepped out, and for the first time, I could breathe fully. I went to the window, looking out at the city again, the lights twinkling in the distance. Everything seemed clearer now. I had finally let go of the story they had written for me, and I was ready to write my own. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't lost in the past. The future was mine, and I had all the space I needed to figure it out. And in that moment, I realized that choosing myself wasn't just about standing up to them. It was about finally letting go of everything that had held me back. And once you step into your own light, you don't go back. I stayed at the window for a long time, watching the lights in the city flicker, feeling the weight of what I had done, but knowing that it was the right thing. It was my time, and for the first time in years, I was free to move forward.